Here we go again. It's been a while since we've had this conversation, but I will give credit where credit is due. Stephen A. Smith is a smart man. Stephen A. Smith knows exactly what he's doing here. Make no mistake about it, these comments that Stephen A. made complaining about not being the highest paid talent at ESPN, these comments were made with a purpose. Longtime viewers of this channel already know I think Stephen A. Smith is leaving ESPN. He's been laying the groundwork for years now. Last year, he launched a podcast and YouTube channel which has no affiliation with the worldwide leader in woke. Now, there were two reasons for this. Number one, Stephen A. wanted to be able to cover topics outside of sports without dealing with the constraints of corporate media. Now, notice, I did not say that he did this so he could say whatever the hell he wanted. Eventually that will be the case, but as long as the non-binary mouse is signing the front of those paychecks, Stephen A. will always be affiliated with ESPN. And number two, I think he launched his podcast so he had a ready-made platform to fall back on once he left ESPN, a departure that could happen by this time next year. His current contract runs through 2024. Which means negotiations for a new deal will begin sometime next year. Yesterday, Stephen A. was the guest with Clay Travis on Outkick. You know, I don't always agree with Stephen A. Smith. I can't stand when he talks about mythical racism. When Joy Reid promotes mythical racism, I get it. When Jemele Hill promotes mythical racism, I understand. It's their business. They're paid to push propaganda. Well, Joy Reid is anyway. After years of huge embarrassing failure, Jemele Hill is finally unemployed. But with Stephen A. Smith, I hold him to a higher standard because I think he knows better. When he pushes mythical racism in sports, it almost feels like he's pandering to his own community. But anyway, one thing I have always respected about him, he is not selective with his platforms. Unlike the yentas on The View who are afraid to debate Ted Cruz, Stephen A., he's not afraid to debate anyone. You'll see him on Fox News, you'll see him on CNN. One day he might be talking to Charlemagne on The Breakfast Club, the next day he's talking to Clay Travis. There's very few people in the mainstream media who are willing to do that. Whether you love him or hate him, that is one thing you got to respect about him. Yesterday, though, he's talking to Clay Travis. The topic of his salary is brought up, and Stephen A., he makes the same demands that we have heard him make before. I should be the highest paid talent at ESPN. I should be number one on the payroll, damn it. I've had the number one show for 12 years. I'm the face of this network. Tell the mouse to pay his spouse. Every time I hear that narrative, I always have the same question. For 12 years now, I have heard Stephen A. Smith claim that he has the number one show. But he never goes into detail, he never explains it. My question is the same. Number one in what? I look at ratings every day. I have never seen First Take ranked number one. Matter of fact, I have never seen First Take ranked number one at the network that they air on. First Take isn't number one in daytime TV. They're not ranked number one in sports opinion shows. When Stephen A. Smith claims that he's number one, he is talking specifically about beating Skip Bayless. Big fucking deal. Everyone beats Skip Bayless. Paw Patrol on Nickelodeon beat Skip Bayless. Reruns of the unpopular soap opera Woke General Hospital beat Skip Bayless. I understand why Stephen A. is frustrated with his compensation at ESPN. When he signed his contract back in 2018, he was the highest paid personality at the network, and deservedly so. But a lot has changed at ESPN since 2018. First of all, a lot of people covering this story in the media, they are making a mistake by thinking this is all about money. This has absolutely nothing to do with money. Whether he's being paid $12 million or $20 million, Stephen A. Smith, his lifestyle, it is not dramatically changing. This dispute, this complaint, it has nothing to do with money and everything to do with ego. I understand his frustration. You have spent the last 12 years building this platform at ESPN. You've been able to convince a few naive people into believing that you have the number one show. Over the summer, while executives at ESPN are complaining about declining revenue, while they're letting go of your friends and your former pastor, Father Jalen Rose, ESPN goes out and breaks the bank for Pat McAfee, gives him $17 million a year. If I was Stephen A. Smith, I would be pissed off too. My anger would accelerate when I saw Pat McAfee's ratings. Here I am on First Take and we're drawing 700,000 on Monday and Tuesday. Average day, we're pulling 500,000 viewers. All the while, Pat McAfee is steaming a turd and he can't convince flies to come and eat it. Of the handful of personalities at ESPN that are making more money than Stephen A. Smith, Pat McAfee, he is the only one where I understand Stephen A.'s frustration. As far as the others, they are more valuable than Stephen A. Smith. Let's go ahead and start with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. ESPN's paying Joe Buck $15 million a year. Troy Aikman's making $18 million. Now, in the eyes of Stephen A. Smith, that doesn't make any sense. These guys are working one night a week while he's on the air Monday through Friday. During the NBA playoffs, he's traveling around the country, covering the league, covering the games. He's making appearances on SportsCenter. When there's a big fight in the UFC, ESPN wants Stephen A. to cover it. Which, that has always confused me because Stephen A. Smith doesn't know shit about MMA. People often think more hours worked should equal more compensation, more money. But you're not being paid for your time. You're being paid based on your value. Truth is, Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, they are far more valuable to ESPN than Stephen A. Smith. Why? Before Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, the NFL, they were giving ESPN the bums for Monday Night Football. Instead of Chiefs-Eagles, ESPN was getting Jets-Falcons. In the past, when they had Steve Levy and some dude named Booger calling Monday Night Football, the NFL, they were reluctant to give ESPN marquee games. Their coverage of the NFL was dog shit. And if they don't improve their coverage of the NBA, ESPN's at risk of losing them too. Joe Buck, Troy Aikman, they were the difference between drawing 8 million viewers on Monday night to drawing 12, 13, maybe even 14 million. Stephen A. Smith, he's the difference between drawing 300,000 at 10 o'clock in the morning to drawing 500,000. Huge, huge difference between the two, or between the three. Another problem for Stephen A. Smith in these contract negotiations, he doesn't have any leverage. Matter of fact, the little bit of leverage that he did have, he destroyed it himself. When Shannon Sharpe, hey, it's me, Shay Shay. When Shannon Sharpe filed for divorce from Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith, he was pressuring for ESPN to sign him. And so they did. Shay starts appearing on First Take on Mondays and Tuesdays. He increases ratings by 2, sometimes 300,000 viewers. When Shannon Sharpe is on First Take, they're pulling 700,000. Other 3 days of the week, they're between 5 and 600,000. Over the summer, it was between 3 and 400,000. If you're an executive at ESPN, why would you be willing to double the salary of Stephen A. Smith? Disney is in the midst of cutting costs right now. There's rumors that they're looking to sell ABC. They're trying to sell a minority stake in ESPN. Stock price is struggling. Disney's lost billions of dollars this year. The last thing that they are worried about is doubling the salary of Stephen A. Smith. He don't have any leverage. And Stephen A., he's likely to bid himself out of this job, I think, on purpose. Like I said, I don't think he wants to return to ESPN. What is left for him to accomplish in sports media? There's no other goal. There's no other mountain to climb. He has convinced himself that he has the number one show on television, and he's been number one for the last 12 years. He's been the face of NBA media for decades. There's nothing left for him to accomplish. Now, I haven't finished the entirety of this interview yet with Clay Travis, but from what I have seen so far, the most interesting part of this interview is when Stephen A. talked about woke culture. Now, due to his past history with mythical racism, some might think that Stephen A. Smith embraces woke culture. The opposite is true. Watch for yourself.
Woke, get you fired. If you ain't woke enough. If you don't agree with what the woke culture says it wants you to agree with. And so what happens is somebody like me, Clay Travis might say 10 things I disagree with, but 9 of them I have no problem with. Now, if I have a problem with something, I'll say so. But the other 9 things you said, I'm like, wait a minute. He might feel differently than me, but it's perfectly within his right to say that. It's perfectly within his right to feel that way. He said absolutely nothing wrong. Why are you trying to get him fired? And then here's where it comes. I'm looking at Clay on the right, but I see Bill Maher on the left. I was at Club Random in Hollywood talking to Bill Maher on his podcast for 2 hours, okay? His politics don't identify with Clay, but listening to the both of them, I don't see that big of a difference in terms of their belief in freedom of speech, freedom of expression, having the right to say what you feel as long as it comes from a cogent and substantive place. There's no problem with it. Who said we have to disagree? If Clay Travis invited me on this show and we talked politics for 2 hours, I'm quite sure we would disagree on a few things. You know what you wouldn't get from me? Offensiveness.
What he just outlined, that's how this country is supposed to work. That's how the mainstream media is supposed to work. You have your opinion, I have mine, we agree, or maybe we disagree, we move on. No one gets canceled. No one has to worry about shit fucks rioting outside their office. No one has to worry about feelings. Now, of course, that's not how the media works in this country. The media, they have created this divide where one side appears on Fox News, the other side appears on MSNBC, and no one appears on CNN because no one is watching. Now, I think social media is partially responsible for this, for creating this divide. I think a lot of these major media companies, they're too worried about social media reactions. Hell, we know ESPN monitors the reactions on Twitter. They've all but admitted to doing so. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what happens between Stephen A. Smith and ESPN. He is going to demand to be the highest paid talent at the network. More than likely, he's going to ask ESPN to double his contract, $24 million a year. When he talked about this last year, Stephen A., he was comparing himself to Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. Said he wanted to make Sean Hannity money. The one thing missing in that equation, the one thing he left out, he doesn't draw Hannity ratings. His audience is 1/3 the size of Sean Hannity's audience. I think Stephen A. knows that ESPN is not going to agree to those terms, which gives him an easy out, gives him an opportunity to leave. More importantly, it gives him the freedom to do what he wants to do. If he's going to do that, if his goal is to host a show in late night television, the time is now to do it. Stephen A's not getting any younger. If he signs a new contract with ESPN, Stephen A would be 62 years old when that contract expired. But give me your thoughts on this. Stephen A. Smith tells Clay Travis that he wants to be the highest paid talent at the worldwide leader in woke. Do you think there's any chance of that happening? Is Stephen A. worth $24 million a year? Or do you think that he is doing this knowing that ESPN won't agree to those terms? Let me know. Sound off in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share the video. I appreciate you guys and your continued support. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.